we're done. I feel we're done now. Gosh, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Dr. Camacho. Really, really wonderful. And Andrew, it's been wonderful. I'm glad you said that you were here 5 years because you snuck in early in high school. He's been around forever, and it's been wonderful having him as a part of this. And I should add, I'm going to stop talking. We're all going to stop talking about the pandemic someday, but Andrew and the senior class are one of those classes that have struggled through dark times and came out on the other side and came out beautifully. So it's a real honor to teach our seniors. They're all here tonight. They're all gathered. I love seeing them. And this is not honoring me. This is a talk about talking tonight. So my subject is going to be humanities, really. And in all that I've gained from you over these past 20 years. I started in 2005. We started in 2003. And the adventure that it's been and the wonderful people it's put into my life and the wonderful things that we've been able to do together. So the pleasure is really all mine. Dr. Camacho said rightly, we don't like to lecture in humanities. We like to learn together. We have a special phrase for it. We call it conviviality. And we have this strong sense of the value of convivial learning. Convivial learning. Now, convivial, generally when we use it, means having fun, drinking, eating, all that stuff. And we do that stuff. But conviviality also means, at its etymological root, living together. Living together, right? So a learning process that's undertaken together. So I'm going to be talking about three things that describe a humanities education. The first is reflective reading. The second is convivial learning. And the third is recollection that forms and shapes a good life. Okay? Those three things. First is individual. Something you go off and do on your own, reflective reading. Convivial learning, we come together, and the kind of Platonic form of it is the seminar, convivial learning, and recollection that flows over into a life well led. Okay, those are the three things, and I have three kind of case studies. The first, and I've sent this to some people, is the episode involving Lucy and C.S. Lewis's Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Okay, so I want to reflect on that. I want to reflect on what Dr. Camacho mentioned himself, the Convivium, which was our 20th anniversary homecoming reunion in humanities. Okay, I want to reflect on that event. And then finally, this painting. This painting here by Andrew Wyeth. And so if you've seen the posters, first of all, we have to say, humanities has like the way best posters of like anybody. It's not just at Villanova. And Dr. Margaret Grubiak is to thank for that. So I want to talk just a little bit about two things on the poster. I want to show you the whole picture before we get going, the whole painting before we get going. And then I want to talk about this title, okay? So here's the whole painting. Here's the whole painting. So look at it for a minute. This is the third thing we'll be talking about, all right? So look at it now and tell me the second thing, write down so you have it for later, the second thing you notice. The first thing you notice is probably not very interesting, and other people probably notice it too, right? Second thing you notice probably is pretty interesting. All right? So the second thing you notice about, and save it, because you want to have it for later, okay? All right? And I am going to ask, there'll be opportunities at some point, at least two questions I want to hear from you on during the lecture, before we get to Q&A even, okay? All right. That's the painting. This is my title. Why Are We Here? Liberal Arts Learning for Life. And I thought this was a great title. I thought I was really clever in coming up with this title. And then I tell you, I got some quote-unquote feedback at home about it. And basically I was taken aside and said, look, this probably means about a half a dozen things. So you got to imagine, should I do it in my English accent to kind of convey this? So this title and the subtitle could mean all these different things. It could mean, what am I doing here tonight? Like, why am I not at home watching Netflix? Which is what actually Dr. McCarraher said to me tonight beforehand. Why am I here tonight instead of watching Netflix, right? It could mean, why is humanities here, right? Why are we here? Why is humanities here? It could mean, and this is not a direct quote because I don't think the other Dr. Tomko has actually used this phrase before. Dude, like, why are we here? Right, that version. And you cannot imagine the other Dr. Tomko saying that word. But like, ultimately, why are we here? Why are we here on this earth? Why are we here in this place? Why do we exist, right? It could also mean, when you're talking about liberal arts learning for life, it could mean for a lifetime, right? Or it could mean for living and living well. And so the question to me was, which one is it? You know, which one is it? And my answer was, yes, right? So I'm going to try and tackle basically all of these questions today in talking about these three things that we're going to cover tonight. And I'm going to give you my thesis statement, all right? My thesis statement, which is an answer to why we are here and to all these different aspects of that question, is this. The argument is there are essential elements of the good life offered through reflective reading within a convivial seminar about a great question. There are essential elements of the good life offered through reflective reading within a convivial seminar about a great question. Okay? So that's my contention. And we're going to kind of play it out. Now, it is not original. I'm doing all the things that make a good essay, so I want a good grade after this, guys. So I've got a clear thesis statement, right? I've set the question, and it's not total. This argument is not totally original. So I'm going to give you my sources. All right? I got 3 sources. First, Socrates, Socrates. You've heard of him, right? He says, he has argued in his apology, towards the end of it, it is the greatest good for a man, apologies for the gender, it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living. Right? Famous bit is the second bit, right? The examined life is not worth living. If you're in honors, maybe you're taking the examined life cohort, right? It owes its existence to this quote, right? I want to talk about the first part, right, which people don't quote. It is the greatest good for us to discuss virtue every day and those other things about which you hear me conversing, right? Discussing, conversing in the pursuit of knowledge is itself the thing itself, right? It's not good for something else. It doesn't kind of buy you something. It doesn't get you somewhere. Doing that is a big claim. It has an EST on it, is the greatest good, right? Convivial learning, us doing this together back and forth, is the greatest good, is the thing itself. All right? Socrates. Second, Alasdair MacIntyre. Okay, Alasdair MacIntyre, contemporary philosopher, right? He builds his thought on Aristotle. So we had Plato, this is Aristotle. MacIntyre's version of Aristotle. MacIntyre says in his book, After Virtue, the good life for man is the life spent in seeking for the good life for man. And the virtues necessary for the seeking are those which will enable us to understand what more and what else the good life for man is. Okay, we'll slow that down just a little bit. The first part should be recognizable from the Plato stuff, from the convivial learning. The good life for man is the life spent in seeking for the good life for man, i.e., thinking about, discussing, conversing, debating about what the good life is itself the good life. Right? That experience of convivial learning is a good in and of itself that makes life worth living. Right? MacIntyre, following Aristotle, says more. Right? It's also what's going to help us understand what more and what else the good life for man is. Where that takes us. So it's good in of itself to discuss and converse, right? But it has fruits that are going to take us to the other aspects of what the good life is. Right? It's going to have fruits. It's going to lead us somewhere. It's going to inform how we then move on with our lives. All right, and then we finally have Thomas W. Smith, right, who many of us know and love, and he is the founding chair of the Humanities department. So he set this thing up. He got the ball rolling. And he very much had Socrates, he very much had Aristotle, he even had Alasdair MacIntyre in mind. And this is what Dr. Smith, who's now dean at the Catholic University of America, wrote about my thesis, about the convivial learning. He writes, liberal education cultivates habits of critical reflection on pressing human questions. It accomplishes this, above all, by teaching us how to recollect previous inquiries into these questions through reflective reading. Okay, a couple things important there. First thing, pressing human questions. Why do we get together? Why do we read? Why do we debate? Why do we discuss? It's not to find out like minutiae of various historical events or to kind of spell out different implications of a kind of abstract theory. We have pressing human, there's things we have to figure out in order to live and to live well. They press on us. The minute we wake up in the morning, right, there are questions that press, what do I do? Who do I see? How do I treat them? Right? So this inquiry, liberal education, is to treat and help us answer, respond to, live out those questions. Skip to the end. It takes place through reflective reading. Reflective reading. Right? So not just reading to kind of take it in, get through it, download some information. Reflective. Reflective. You're pondering it. You're thinking about how it relates to you. Right? And then this is the interesting one. This is my wild card in the talk. And I'm still figuring it out, so maybe you can help me. But this sense of recollecting. That recollecting is an important part of this process. Which points to memory and remembrance. Right memory, right remembrance. Which we don't often think about when we're talking about these issues. But what he's saying is like, it's weird, isn't it weird that if we want to try and accomplish moral living the good life, our best model is and has seemed to be for a very long time that we recollect what other people in past generations have said about it. So we're dependent. We're dependent on the past and our memory going into the past, and people have, and the fact that people have left us things that we can pick up. like people have written with previous generations in mind. So we recollect it, we study it in the present, and then we have to recollect it down the road. It has to get in us somehow within the present in a way that in the future we will have that knowledge, we will have that wisdom ready for us when we need to think about our lives. So recollection and memory, they both operate in the past, have to come into the present, and then fare forward in the future for us, which is complicated. It's complicated. But think about recollection. Help me think about recollection. Okay. 3 parts, as promised. Starting with reflective reading and Lucy, moving on to convivial learning and our kind of festival that was the Humanities reunion, and then finally back to the painting and thinking about recollection and the good life. What would this type of learning lead to in terms of our lives together? All right. Dawn Treader, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. How many people have read Voyage of the Dawn Treader? Do you remember? Oh, right, quite a few. Okay, but if you haven't, don't worry. Dr. Perez, was that a hand? Yeah, it was. Okay. He wrote his doctorate on C.S. Lewis, so that was a canned question. So I want to talk a little bit about a particular incident in Voyage of the Dawn Treader, which is and just a little bit about the book as a whole. It's about a ship. It's about a sailing adventure. It's a sequel to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it comes after The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, 4 children, and one of them is Lucy. And she has 2 older brothers and a beautiful older sister, Susan. And they meet Aslan, they have a lot of adventures, and eventually become kings and queens in Narnia, all 4 of them. Lucy and Edmund, her brother, come back into this novel, into this story, and end up on this ship, and a subsequent king, King Caspian, is sailing to the utter east, right? He's hoping to kind of come to the end of the world, and then maybe venture past the end of the world into the next world, Aslan's country, the supernatural. Along the way, they stop at these different islands. So it's a little bit like the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. And it seems to me what's happening is that on each island, one of the characters undergoes a particular moral test. They have some kind of adventure that is a test they need to pass through. Now, eventually, we reach what's called the Island of Voices, Island of the Voices. And these chapters single out Lucy and put her front and center. Why, I ask myself, when I get to these chapters, are we here? Right? So there's that title again. Why are we here? Why does Lucy need tested? Lucy was the good kid. She was always the good kid. Her brothers and sisters, they could be real knuckleheads. They could be vain, they could be impatient. Edmund commits this whole treachery thing, right? They're kind of screw-ups. Lucy's the one who gets it right. She's kind, she's good, she's smart, she doesn't get in trouble in Narnia, she doesn't get in trouble at home. Why would she need to go through something? And yet the Island of Voices presents her specifically a challenge. Right? And I kind of go through the pictures here by Pauline Baynes. The boat lands, and you're on an eerie estate. It's kind of creepy. And it's creepy because there's no one around. However, there's signs of it being very well managed, very well looked after. which makes it kind of weird. You can see on those two pictures on the left, right? And what we end up finding out is that this indeed is an inhabited island, only everyone is invisible. And the voices show up. Right? You hear them coming down, thump, 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 thump first, and then the voices. And the voices confront the crew and say, we have a task that we need completed. And they point to Lucy and they say, Lucy is the person, she's the one who has to do it. And they're like, no, well, no, we're not doing, you're not taking this young girl and making her do something on her own. But they're aggressive, they're bullying these voices, and apparently, like, when you're holding your sword, no one can see it. If you throw the sword, suddenly somebody can see it, right? And they've got spears, they've got swords, and they realize they're overpowered, and eventually, Lucy agrees to do the task, which is she has to sneak into, there's a magician kind of in charge of the island, like Prospero from The Tempest, and she has to read the counterspell, because these voices think they're under an enchantment that has made them invisible, but also ugly, right? So she's got to read the counterspell. She's got to sneak in, read the counterspell, and then they'll do what they want. And she agrees, right? She says, there are dozens of them there. We can't fight them, and I don't want to be cut to bits with invisible swords any more than anyone else. So she enters alone through this kind of creepy mansion. She passes by this mirror, you see it on the left there, which also has this kind of, as it were, uglifying effect. It's a refracting mirror, it distorts her image. She looks at this. And then she makes her way to the magician's book. She finds 4 spells. The first one is a temptation that she barely resists. And that's a spell to make her the most beautiful woman in the world, and she would be the envy of her older sister. Right? And she'd be able to put her older sister in her place. And she doesn't cast that one. Now, having succeeded in that, she then gives in to the next one, where she casts a spell that allows her to hear what others think of her. So she magically eavesdrops on a friend who in a weak moment is saying something cruel about Lucy. And that ruins their friendship thereafter. And it pits, as a result, Lucy's kind of on the verge of despair or revenge at that point against this friend. She's saved from either despair or revenge by the next spell, which is that's interesting. It says it's not a spell, it's a story for the refreshment of the spirit. And that breaks the enchantment, right, and leads her to the spell she needs, which is, quote, to make hidden things visible. This reveals the creature. It reveals Aslan, who had been there the whole time, this kind of Christ figure lion, if you know the Narnia Chronicles. And she meets the magician as well. Now, I've never been really able to talk about this when we talk about this book in class. I've just not really been able, I just didn't know what to do with this. And part of it is I haven't found it relatable. Like, I'm like, what is this about? Like these islands of voices and kids reading books. Like, the other morals in the story are pretty straightforward. There's a kind of greed one. They get to this, this water that turns everything into gold. There's this kid, this mean kid, Eustace Scrubb, who's turned into a dragon. Like, I get those moral messages, but I couldn't relate to this one. Right? Since then, and I've been thinking about this for a while, I've had a kind of 180. And I actually now think that this is like one of the most relatable parts of the book. And there's a specific passage I read in a study of the role of technology in our lives that took me back to this passage. So some of you may have encountered this book. It's Alone Together by Sherry Turkle. right? And what she's talking about here is what she calls the tethered self, that the adolescent, typical adolescent feels. Like you feel you are tethered to your technology. And that both you and your technology are, quote, always on. Okay? So this is up here. I'm going to read this together because it develops. Right? This is Turkle talking about our experience today. It's 2017, so you got to update Facebook. All right? So I know you got to kind of replace it for a social media that's not for the olds. Okay, so just bear with me there. I think it still holds though. Okay, here's what she says. Feeling a bit stranded used to be considered a part of adolescence and one that developed inner resources. Now it is something that the network makes it possible to bypass. Teenagers say that they want to keep their cell phones close, and once it is with you, you can always, quote, find someone. Sometimes teenagers use the network to stay in contact with the people they know for real, but what of online friends? Who are they to you? You may never have met them, yet you walk the halls of your school preoccupied with what you will say to them. You are stalked on Facebook, but cannot imagine leaving because you feel that your life is there. And you, too, have become a Facebook stalker. Facebook feels like home, but you know that it puts you in a public square with a surveillance camera turned on. You struggle to be accepted in an online clique, but it is characterized by its cruel wit, and you need to watch what you say. These adolescent posts will remain online for a lifetime, just as those you friend on Facebook will never go away. Anxieties migrate, proliferate. We don't know these presents that Turkle describes. You can't touch them or name them, but we know they're there. And there is nowhere to go to escape them. No home, no bedroom, no hallway, no safe space where they are not, no time when they are off. Because the internet is everywhere and always on and always watching. We do know their cruel wit and their invisible weapons, the way the mob can turn, the spear or sword of an anonymous comment can strike suddenly, and the unpredictability of a pile-on can turn your way. So what do you do? What do you do? Well, you have to let these voices inside, so that you can tame them, or try to tame them. Internalize them so you can anticipate how you will be looked at, how you will be heard, no matter how you really want to look or how you really want to speak. These are dominating voices that take away your freedom. Their greatest power comes when you are alone and hear them all as one voice in your head that you think is your own voice, convincing you that it speaks the truth of what everyone thinks. And this adversarial voice overpowers by making you doubt your own goodness and worth, and by making you envy. And by envy, you want to be, or to take, or to destroy the good of others. And this is what Lucy hears in her head. This is what she sees reflected back in that little uglifying mirror. And at the magician's book, these overpowering voices are what she needs to overcome and to be free from. And there's another challenge, and it's a kind of paradox that Lucy faces, and it's a more perennial one. And it's not just defensive or critical against the social influence and the power of these voices. It's a positive or creative growth that she needs to realize. And this is suggested by Turkle's positive mention right at the beginning of being a bit stranded. Right? Being a bit stranded is a moment for independent thought and judgment that's needed for essential growth, for gaining inner resources. Right? So do you see the catch-22 that she's in, right? There's an essential independence, a need to be alone, a certain stranded loneliness that's appropriate, and what Lucy needs. However, this quest for the magician's book also puts her alone with the voices, right? And challenge her to lose her freedom. So there's a freedom she needs and a freedom that makes her vulnerable, right? And they're coalescing at the same time. So being stranded can liberate, but being left alone with the voices can also destroy. So how should we understand this moment of potential growth and the dominant and the dramatic struggle between domination and liberation? Okay, let's zoom out for a second. And I want to share a bit from a book called The Shattering of Loneliness by an author named Eric Varden, who looks back to St. Athanasius and echoes St. Augustine. Right? And he reminds us of this kind of biblical concept that the human person is made in the image and likeness of, quote, a supremely free, supremely good creator God, who is the, quote, source of all goodness, and the good has no envy for anything. Okay? This is the God who has made everything out of nothing, not out of pressure or need, but out of pure joy. This is the God who sees each thing as good and all things together as very good. It's the God who is secure in being all good, wants nothing, and thus envies nothing, but delights in everything without the need to possess, acquire, or subjugate. So the human person's growth in this concept means following the logic of humanity's own being as a likeness and image of this joyful Logos God, who is always already free and free from envy. It means becoming what you are not yet, means rightly remembering and growing along with the logic of what you already are, which will make you free in the good, your real good, and the good of others. Remember, the good has no envy for anything. And your own longing logic points to goodness, to freedom from envious voices, and towards delight in the goods of others. So Lucy's encounter at the book shows that all these are at stake in her reflective reading, right? It turns out vanity wasn't her real problem. She got over that spell pretty quickly. Her bigger challenge was envy derived from insecurity. She had wanted her sister's looks because she was insecure about how she was looked upon by others. She wanted their approval, to know of their approval, because she was not convinced of her own goodness. And when she was alone, the only voice she heard from herself was that cruel, adversarial voice. But she was never really alone, which she had known but forgotten. And the adversarial voice was always lying. And she was always already good and beloved. The story for the refreshment of the Spirit breaks the power of those false words with its own recollection that offers a counter view of reality. Lucy later recalled it as the loveliest story I've ever read or ever shall read. And thereafter sees in every good story a reminder of that story that reawakens her to reality. It is in that good reading and in that good thought, which rejects a dismembering fantasy in favor of a remembering imagination, that makes reality appear, undistorted and unscorned. It makes that invisible and inaudible hidden truth of the good visible and heard again. And this right memory of the world's goodness and Lucy's own goodness defeats the envious voice of loneliness. It does also shatter loneliness, putting her into the company of Aslan and the magician, who turns out to be more Gandalf than Saruman. But that's another book. And then there's another phase of this story, right? Which is funny and helpful, I think, in that it restores a vision of those cruel voices and who they really are, right? They are vulnerable, they are insecure, they are wounded, they are anxious, they are unfree people behind their handles and their hashtags, who hear their own confused and confusing voices. And once visible to Lucy and to each other, they even become delightfully comic. And the sight allows Lucy to see them for what they are and even find a restored sense of community for them and among them. And this is her reaction when she sees what these voices are. They're the duffel pods, right? She says, "Oh, the funnies," cried Lucy, bursting into laughter. And there you see their picture over there. They got about by jumping like fleas or frogs, and what jumps they made, as if each big foot were a mass of springs. For now they were jumping in all directions and calling out to one another, "Hey, lads, we're visible again!" And this guy, I love the chief, right? He says, "Visible we are," said one in a tasseled red cap who was obviously the chief and not very smart. "And what I say is, when chaps are visible, why, they can see one another," right? And Lucy's just delighting in this newfound vision of these creatures in front of her. And I've got to admit, this is a strange connection, and if you don't see it, fine, tell me later, okay? But there's this famous passage by Thomas Merton, who was a monk in Kentucky, and lived out in the country, and then had to do errands in Louisville, like the big city in Kentucky. And he kind of like, he's in the city center, and he just has this moment, right? And this is his moment. This is Merton now. And that's not Louisville, those are still the duffel pods. But this is Merton's vision of the crowd in Louisville. He says, "In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all those people, that they were mine and I theirs, and that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. This sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. I have the immense joy of being man, a member of a race in which God himself became incarnate, as if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me. Now I realize what we all are, and if only everybody could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There is no way of telling people that they are all walking around, shining like the sun." It's beautiful. Now, Lucy eventually does tell them that they are shining like the sun, and she convinces them that they don't need to be that they aren't uglified. And they agree in the end. They say, "Hear, hear, true for you, Missy. Very nice we look. You couldn't find a handsomer lot." That's a great line. Love that. Okay. So that's reflective reading. Reflective reading leading to freedom, but also opening up to community. So we're going to talk about community now. and the type of convivial learning that can happen in community. So Dr. Camacho already previewed this. We had our kind of homecoming reunion in September. This was our theme quote from Augustine, right? Because whenever joy is shared among many, even the gladness of individuals is increased. For all are affected by the common enthusiasm, and they catch the flame from one another, right? And these are just a few pictures from Convivio that capture what it was all about, and we're happy to have people here. And what Dr. Camacho already said, and is important, that as fun as it was to get everyone together, the best part was having seminars together. Now, I didn't know which photo permissions I had, so I had to put happy faces on everybody. But we were all happy to be there, I assure you. And there's a couple features that were really, really wonderful about this weekend. One of them was every year in the senior seminar, it's like an all-star game, right? This is the last year's graduating class. Last year's, we haven't taken your picture yet, right? You haven't graduated yet, seniors. Stop getting all my, yeah, okay. So this is last year's senior symposium, right? And you have these wonderful people who you've seen in a class here and a class there, and then they all come together. And it's just wonderful to see everybody come together from about 20 years, right? And it's incredible. Like, these people don't know each other, but we were there, and it was like everybody knew each other. Everybody knew each other, and our seminars were just fantastic. It felt like your best class, right, in the middle of the semester when everyone's gotten to know each other. It was that easy to do, okay? So I want you to pick out the second thing you notice from this photo, too. The first thing is obviously the giant smiley faces. There's a second thing to notice as well. See if you notice correctly what the second thing is. But I want to talk about what this tells us. What does this tell us? And it makes what I think is actually a really important argument clear. Okay? People talk about the liberal arts, and they'll kind of say, well, the liberal arts are non-servile. Right? They are not meant to be under the sway of something. Right? They don't serve any particular use. Right? Which people tend to kind of hear and think, well, that means they're useless and good for nothing, right? I mean, that kind of, you hear that definition, right? It's good for itself, it's non-servile, it doesn't form any use, it's useless, not really good for anything, right? I mean, you get that definition when you start from something and then negate your way to a liberal arts education. If you start at a liberal arts education, if you start with conviviality, if you start with what the smartest people in the history of the world said life is all about, your picture looks different, right? Your picture looks different. So instead of something that is a negation, you get something that is a fullness. Humanities, a liberal arts education, is what we could call an instrumental good, right? It helps you go places. You look at all those happy people underneath the smiling faces, right? They're living well. Their education has helped them arrive at their next step. But the good of a humanities education is not defined by, or exhausted by, or comprehended by its instrumentality, right? It's instrumentality. It's instrumental, it helps you along the way, but that's not all it is. If it only helped you along the way, you would not come back to it. How many people here took a driver's ed course in high school? All right? Did you go back to the reunion? No, you didn't. You did not go back to the great driver's ed reunion, right? You get your insurance discount, you got it, you're done, right? Unless you get speeding tickets, and then you probably have to go back, right? An instrumental good, which is merely an instrumental good, will take you to the next stage, but then there's no reason that you would unnext. There's no reason you would go back. So what the going back tells us, from these 100 alumni or so who came back, is that there is something that no matter how many times you go back to, you will gain nourishment from. Right? That was dramatic, right? So my proposal is that the good of the Humanities seminar, the good of our convivial learning together, is more like a festival. It's more like Christmas. A festival takes the time, the place, the people, and makes it golden. Shines it through with sun. Right? And that sense of festival can be repeated again and again, and is good in of itself and brings goods of refreshment with it. And you couldn't have Christmas on your own. You can't have a festival on your own. You need other people. Okay? So reflective reading, convivial learning, seminar learning that's like a festival. What kind of life would this yield? So now we're going to close with this painting. And what I want to say is this painting illustrates communal recollection that brings us transcendent joy. And if you have this kind of formation, this kind of education, at the end of it, you may be able to make a testament like Andrew Wyeth makes. So this painting was made when he was 71 in 1989. And it's his looking back. So for people who have read Hannah Coulter, you kind of have to think of Andrew Wyeth painting in the way that Hannah Coulter told her story. It's the end of life looking back. And we're going to talk about three different things. We're going to talk about the landscape in this photo, in this painting. Right? So look at the background. This is nearby. This is in Chadds Ford. So if you know where Longwood Gardens is, it's up by Longwood Gardens. And it's where he lived his whole life and where he painted. So this is a hill up there as part of the Kerner's farm. That's actually kind of what it really would look like. That's probably the only building you would actually see from that vantage point in that painting. So what has he done? He's brought together all the buildings, all the human-built environmental factors that were dear and important to him and concentrated them in this picture. So that's in the background. The people. Look at those figures. So anyone notice anything strange about those figures? One guy's wearing a German helmet, German military helmet. The one guy over here has a hook over his hand. You see that? The other's wearing kind of traditional German dress. She's got kind of Swedish braids over here, right? Very unusual. Only two of the people at the time that this was painted were alive, the two women in the painting. Everyone in that painting are Andrew Wyeth's neighbors. They're Andrew Wyeth's neighbors that were the subject of his paintings throughout his entire career. And there's tons more. I think he did about 200 of Helga here, his neighbor. There's the Kerners, who are the farmers. There's Bill Loper, who's the farmhand with a hook. Adam Johnson there. The Kerners were German immigrants Carl fought in World War I, so it was a tough time to be in America at mid-century. These are all the people through whom Andrew Wyeth saw the sun shining his whole life. They are the people who revealed some part of the goodness of the good to him. Right? And at the end of his life, he reassembles them here. Some of them even lost to death when he does so. The plot of this painting, the action of it. This is a maypole, and they're doing a maypole dance. Not very well, it seems, where you take the ribbon and you kind of dance around this pole, and it wraps the ribbons around the pole, and you get this kind of beautifully decorated pole. And it is a traditional kind of, it goes way back. It's Christianized in Europe. So this is Peter Bruegel, two depictions of maypoles. So we're doing this kind of medieval ritual in 20th century Pennsylvania. So I have two things. There's only two things Wyeth would only say about this painting. He would only offer like two comments. He loved talking about his paintings. He only said two things, right? The first, I have a question for you. What's weird about this painting? What weird thing do you notice? No?
The tree on top.
Well, that's weird, right? It's got a little Christmas tree on top.
Yeah.
That's weird number one. There's a bigger weird. Josh? There's some footprints. There's no footprints to get there. That's super weird. I hadn't thought of that. How'd they get there, right? That's good, Josh. That was really good. It's an art historian in the making.
Why are they dancing on the maple in the tree?
Emmeline, awesome, right? What is it? It's a maypole. When would you dance around a maypole? Guess what? May. Yeah, right? This is dead of winter, and they're doing this May celebration that should take place in spring. His quote, the one of the only two things he would ever say about it when he painted it, is he said, I wanted absolute joy. I wanted absolute joy. What does that mean? Well, it means staring into winter, symbol of death. Here at the end of his life, he looks back, he sees the light he has been given through all these people, and he wants to recognize it. He wants to give thanks for it. This is a celebration of life, and a life that the feeling to me is will overflow past death. That this memory making and this goodness doesn't end when winter comes. That's one thing he said about it. The other is, there's one more thing to notice. There's one really cool thing to notice. Did anyone pick it up? Anything unusual that Veronica?
Well, is someone missing on the other side?
Wow, I knew there's a reason we brought you to Villanova, right? The thing Wyeth would say, he'd say, I wanted absolute joy. The other thing he would say, did you notice the extra ribbon? So it's not only somebody is missing, there's a ribbon left out for them. You see it? You see it? What does that mean? I don't know. He never said my sense of what that extra ribbon means. It's an invitation. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to tether yourself to something whose rhythm and joy will give you freedom and goodness. Right? It's an invitation to join in to dance, to be one of the dancers, one of those people who brings sun and light. Watch this. Do you notice anything else? Did you notice the extra chair? Did you notice the extra chair? There are essential elements of the good life offered through reflective reading within a convivial seminar about a great question. And those goods are festival freedom, memory, community, right living, right dying, and joy. And I want to close with a short bit of a poetic rewriting of the Alma Mater by Carrie Sweeney, who graduated in 2022. Someday I will return again to you with joy, a sweet amen. A sweet amen. Which is another way of saying yes, which is another way of saying thank you. Thank you. We do have time for questions, so I can just field questions. I'm not as scared. Who would like, anybody who wants to ask a question? Emma.
Go like 4 slides back.
Okay.
I'll tell you when to stop. Nope, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. One more. Nope, one more. Maybe one more. That one, thank you.
Okay. We'll give everyone a chance to set up, and then I ask you a question.
No, that was my question.
What's the
I
slide?
just wanted to see the slide.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good. It's a good slide. It's a good slide. I'll put the painting up. We'll have the painting in the background. Question slots. Dr. O.
Have you seen the movie, the Johnny Depp movie?
I haven't actually. I should. This is terrible. I made it through like one of them, and then I haven't seen the follow-ons.
I don't remember the details, but I remember this is exactly the part of the story that's different.
Okay.
The temptation is different in the movie. So if anyone can remember what it is, like maybe you can see why did they decide to change it?
I remember what it is.
Yeah.
In the movie, she wants to look like her sister, and then she dreams that make it look like the most beautiful version of you sitting, and she sits in the mirror and she sees herself.
Okay.
And then she dreams. Wait, this is coming back to me. It's so vivid now. But then she dreams that like she doesn't exist in that world. Like she comes out and her brothers are there, and they're all happy, and she's talking to them, and they call her Susan, and she like Lucy doesn't exist.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. So what happens? What happens in the book? So the question is like, what does the movie do? And to be honest, I got off the movie. Like, if you like the movies, that's fine. I'm happy for you. There was an alteration in the movie that just really bothered me, which is in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Aslan defeats the White Witch, kind of physically overpowers her, and then says, "It is finished," which is a really weird alteration because that's from the Passion, right? And so this kind of act of attacking, kind of mauling, so it becomes like the scene of the Passion. So I haven't stuck with the movies. What happens in the Susan thing is she sees a lion in the illuminated manuscript, which sparks a memory. So we were talking about memory. So seeing that sparks a memory, which short circuits this fantasy about. Again, if you know Lord of the Rings, she has a kind of Galadriel moment where I could be the beautiful and terrible queen, right? And that's kind of what's happening. And seeing the lion reminds her of her past life, right? Reminds her of who she is, and that short circuits that destructive fantasy. And then we moved on. So that's how it plays out in the book. So it'd be interesting to see exactly what they're up to in the film, because it's an important moral moment of kind of moral psychology. The really important follow-on, though, is the second one that she follows for that she does cast, which I was saying was out of insecurity, and so that's a kind of bedrock issue that it was out of. But she does that one as a reward for having overcome the first one, right? So she rewards herself with a little bit of mischief because she had done one thing right, right? And this is it. If I had a counter argument against Lent, and sometimes during Lent I feel like I want to make a counter argument against Lent, it's like you can get into that mentality. You're like, well, I didn't eat a cheeseburger on Friday. That means I can, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to say what I'm going to do on Saturday. Not cut the grass. Anyway, but you know, you kind of you kind of like pat yourself on the back, and then you go do something hurtful, right? Yeah. Questions, thoughts. I'm also just willing to take thoughts or insights into the painting or anything else along the way. Sarah.
I was thinking about like the sort of physics of memory. Like it seems like it's almost like a funnel that goes down. Like you're kind of returning, but every time you return, you're going deeper.
Yeah.
And I was actually reflecting. For those of you who don't know, I'm an alumna and took Dr. Tomko's classes like in 2013, 2014. And I remember what you did so well, and my question is this intentional? I remember your classes like started with a question or started with an idea. And by the end of the semester, I returned to that idea, but with a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
You almost like brought the class back to the same point, but you realized how different you were. And I wondered if you do that intentionally, and I think pedagogically you do, and if that's because of this like physics of recollection.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just like that as a comment. We don't need to put a question on it. No, maybe we do. Yeah, it's wonderful, and the deepening spiral is a really lovely and I think important. When you have a memory that sticks, that's what happens. Like you lose so much. So much kind of passes away. And I think one of the things we're there to do in class is to remember things together. And you remember things better if you understand them. Right? If you've just kind of taken in information and then spouted it back out for like a multiple choice exam or whatever, you do that. You do it successfully or unsuccessfully, and then you flush it out because you got to make room for the next bit of material. But if there's something worth understanding, and it's worth remembering, and the two go hand in hand. And the deeper you understand it, the more aspects of it that you understand, its context, what it leads to, who its friends are, the more likely it is going to stay with you. And the more likely it's going to draw you into pursuing deeper. And the deeper you go and the more you learn, the stronger your memory of it grows. So I think I do that as a matter of pedagogy, and it's also a matter of ignorance and / wonder, in that I'm trying to figure stuff out too. And each class I work with, and that we kind of convene around one of these questions, I learn so much more. So the human person course, I don't know how many times I've taught that, but I mean, like this time around, like, again, there's just insights that are popping at me that make this more meaningful, that make it more lasting. In the way that, you might have seen, Wyeth might have seen Carl out, cutting the grass, right? And then he kind of talks to him and learns something about him, hears something about Germany. So again, it goes deeper, and so the memory and the understanding seem to build on one another. And the more powerful that memory is, the deeper the understanding is, the more formative it is going to be for life. So yeah, I think that's a way of teaching. I think it's a way of thinking. I think it's a way of living. So thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that. Good. Yeah, in the back.
In this picture, this painting, it seems that people have been like in motion for a bit. is there some kind of insight to like why they seem to not have gotten anywhere with the?
I don't know. Like I said, they don't seem to be very good at this. They're really enjoying it, and now Josh has totally got me thinking about the footsteps. Right? They seem to have probably gone around a bit too, but they're just there. I don't know. Maybe it's a bit of a kind of like frozen moment. I don't know. Dr. Grubiak, if only we had an art historian.
I know. I mean, I see eternity in there.
Mm,
That
mhm.
they wrapped and rewrapped and wrapped again,
Yeah.
and they made this in circle, and it's, sorry Josh, they're not coming or going.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
in circle, and I see, what
Yeah.
else was after death?
Yeah. I think that would go along with kind of the. There's something beyond natural here, and I think that accords with like how I read the painting, as it were, and how I see the painting. Yeah, Dr. Perez.
I have a question for Dr. Grubiak now.
Okay, all right, you go ahead. We'll turn this into like a real seminar. Go ahead.
Do you have any insights or thoughts about the distribution of light in the painting? Because it seems
Yeah.
the sky's gray, the foreground's gray, but then it seems like the background's illuminated. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'd be interested to hear if a kind of theory of the light and how the light is working. One of the characteristics of Wyeth, I feel, is when you look at his paintings, one of the things that he does is you always feel off balance in nature. Like you get a sense of like two things that strikes me. Like you have a sense of like a planet, you're on a planet that's moving, and you almost get vertigo, and then you're standing on an earth that's alive, right? So in terms of like the aura or whatever, if you've seen the Terrence Malick paintings, it feels a little bit like being in a Malick film, looking at a Wyeth landscape, I feel. So I don't know. I don't really have a kind of theory of how the light's working, but I'd be pretty darn interested. Yeah, Emily.
Two quick things. One thought, again, I'm not sure I'm expecting an answer here, but it looks like it should be snow. Like that
should be
sky is the color of snow.
snow. Yeah.
It's not snowing,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But anyway,
Yeah.
digressing from the painting.
Yeah.
And again, this is more of a common question, but I really, really liked the bit that you quoted from the Downtrodder.
Mm.
When chaps are visible, why they can see one another.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I wonder, in the context of, you presented that in the section on reflective reading,
Yeah.
and the great good that can come out of reading, like you phrased it, the thoughts and the life experiences of some of the smartest individuals in history,
Yeah.
and what they thought was key to living well.
Yeah.
And in light of this quote, the idea that, you have to be seen in a sense to see clearly.
Yeah.
And we talk all about loneliness and isolation in our society, and I absolutely think to a certain extent that's true. But something I found in Humanities and in this reflective reading that I've been entered into, how much I'm seen by people who I'm separated from them by decades or centuries, culture, language, even religion.
Yeah.
And yet I'm seen, and yet we can all see something of ourselves, or see something of ourselves in that.
Yeah.
And then through that, we finally get around to understanding others.
It's wonderful, Emily.
It's so the reflective reading as a natural introduction into conviviality.
Yeah.
Because you learn the being seen and the seeing go together.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to respond just with two things. One of them is ridiculous, and one of them is sublime. And I'll start with the ridiculous, which is when a couple of years ago, it was a number of years ago now, we have pub groups in our Inklings course. So one of the pub groups, and it had Ethan Swain in it, and Laura Swain, she's now Laura Swain, Josh Percario Foley, And we read this kind of fairly early on, and then they acted like those jumper guys like the whole time. And Ethan was the chief, and he would just say like ridiculous tautologies, and then the rest of them would say, "You go, Ethan. You tell him what it is. You tell him what it's like." That was really tiresome. So that's the sublime thing. But I've got another quote from Varden, which I didn't get to, and it keys into what you were talking about in the mind, which is what we're after in that reflective reality is a freedom that allows us to see reality from a standpoint of our own good, but also see the goods of others and their vision of reality. So Varden, this is a wonderful book, and I recommend it highly. This was a kind of discussion or his account of why we need convivial learning, or almost like seminar learning. He says, it goes without saying that, quote, all the truth exceeds what any individual can apprehend. My capacity for truth, however blessed it may be by nature, however extended by grace, is inadequate to fathom truth in its fullness. My remembrance, too, is limited. To be consoling and complete, remembrance and truth has to be shared. Which I just felt was like a lovely companion to what you're saying. And one of the things that makes kind of that seminar experience the greatest good is that there is this kind of touch of the eternal, right? You step into that circle, you step into it with Plato, with Homer, with Alistair MacIntyre, with Andrew Wyeth, right? I mean, Plato's argument in the Apology, and what he says about how that sense of convivial learning enables him to face death, because he's under trial and under trial for capital punishment. He says, look, I get it. He says, and I could leave, but death is probably one of two things. It's either a dreamless sleep, right? And that means at least I don't have to put up with the annoying people around me anymore, right? If I can just go to sleep. Or it's like a seminar in the afterlife. And I'll get to go up to Homer and say, why did you write that, Homer? Right? And then I can ask Agamemnon, right? And then I can ask him, or Parmenides, what he was up to, right? So that's what that enabled, that sense of like this kind of being in the circle of memory across time. Like he's like that's worth it for me. I'll take that wager, which is quite something. And it seems like it's a similar sentiment to what we're seeing in Wyeth when Socrates makes that argument.
Okay, friends, there's so much more that we could say. I just had one thought, and I'm going to let Dr. Tomko have the last word, which is only appropriate. But a ribbon that's remaining, a chair that's remaining. Dr. Tomko, I think we'll all agree, points these things out. Because one of the things that he does is he actually extends to us the ribbon. He pulls up the chair. Many of you sat in his chair and he's listened to you go on and on about your problems and how you're going to fit everything in. And then suddenly you find yourself declaring a humanities major. He's opening, he's extending the ribbon to us. And I think it's only right that we thank him for the many, many years that he's done that for all of us and for his talk tonight.
All right, thank you.